There are 4 cases only before the court. The first case concerns an individual known as Comrade Duik, who was the effective commandant of a camp known as S21 or Tul Sleng in Phnom Penh, which was the principal security camp. There were actually hundreds of these camps across the country during the time of the Khmer Rouge regime, but this was the main security center of the regime, based in Phnom Penh, and the regime essentially used it to torture and murder individuals who they believed were essentially traitors to the regime. And because it was, frankly, a completely insane regime, how it worked was they basically brought people in, tortured them, made them make often false confessions implicating other individuals, and then they would go and arrest them too, which is actually when I was watching The Response yesterday, the movie The Response. I don't know if anybody else was watching it. That was actually quite chilling for me, where people were tortured and forced to make confessions referred to in that movie. That's exactly what the Khmer Rouge did. And so in the process, ultimately ended up murdering 800,000 of their own people. If you go to Tul Sleng, and I mentioned this last year, but it's actually something I do every 3 months to remind myself of why I'm there, is entire families were rounded up and taken to this camp and murdered. So often if one individual within the family was implicated, then the rest of the family were taken to the camp as well. And because the Khmer Rouge were very thorough in recording the entry of people into the camp, every person who entered the camp, there is a photo face shot of them, and all of these can be seen when you go into the camp now. It's a museum, essentially. And extremely chilling and distressing. Many, many young people and people, entire families with babies and parents knowing exactly what the fate of the entire family is going to be in this place. Anyway, Duik was the commander of that camp. He was tried in 2009 and convicted in July of 2010 of crimes against humanity and grave breaches, and sentenced to 35 years imprisonment, reduced to a period of 30 years because he was illegally imprisoned for a period of time prior to his trial. I decided when I was appointed that we would appeal that sentence, and also a number of the legal findings in that case, a number of the technical legal findings. And I have asked for the imposition of a life term, even if, for the reason that he was illegally detained, he will serve probably, what I've asked for is a period of 40 years. But I think it's important symbolically for the country that he gets a life term. This was a man who went to work every day, living a happy family life outside the camp, and went in and basically ordered the murder and torture of innocent people. The second case concerns the 4 most senior living members of the regime. The deputy to Pol Pot. Pol Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge regime, and his deputy was an individual known as Nguyen Chia. He was the deputy secretary. Khieu Samphan, the former president of the regime, Yang Seri, the foreign minister, and Yang Seri's wife, Ying Tarit, the Minister of Social Affairs. Now, these are the 4 most senior living members of the regime. They've been charged with crimes against humanity, genocide, and also crimes under the National Criminal Code. It's a domestic court that is internationalized, so the court has jurisdiction both over these very serious international crimes and also over national crimes. The closing order, which is essentially the indictment or the charge sheet, was issued in September of last year. Interestingly, and unlike in certainly the legal system that I come from, that closing order can be appealed, because unlike a simple charge sheet in a common law system, the closing order is a voluminous document, because it basically sets out all the work of the investigating judges. It sets out a narrative of all of the events. And that was appealed by the 4 accused on a variety of different grounds, challenging the investigation that had been carried out by the investigating judges. And that appeal was heard, that appeal was determined actually in January of this year, and the case was sent to trial. We have had what's called the initial hearing, which was at the end of June, which dealt with jurisdictional issues, so challenges by the defense to the jurisdiction of the court on a whole variety of grounds that I don't have time to deal with here. But for example, one particular ground is that a court was set up by the Vietnamese who invaded Cambodia in 1979 and essentially brought down the Khmer Rouge regime. They set up a revolutionary tribunal and tried one of the individuals who's standing trial now, Ieng Sary, in absentia. And Ieng Sary was trying to argue, you can't try me again, the double jeopardy rule. I've already been tried and convicted. Well, actually, he was tried in absentia, never served any kind of sentence, and frankly, the whole process of that court, it was a kangaroo court. It was basically a joke. The defense counsel in that particular trial were giving evidence against their own clients. So our argument was, look, this trial, frankly, was not a trial at all. It doesn't count. You can't argue. The defense can't argue and put forward a completely false trial to justify why their client shouldn't stand trial now. So that was one issue. There are a number of other jurisdictional issues. We hope the trial will begin towards the end of this year. The accused, as you can imagine, are elderly. The eldest is 85, and the stress of these trials at that kind of age obviously is of some serious concern to us. And in fact, today, 12 hours ahead, of course, in Phnom Penh, there was a hearing in respect of one individual, and this is a public matter. I was quite surprised that it's been made public, but it has. It was, so I can tell you about it. One of the individuals is likely not to stand trial, Ying Tarit, as a result of Alzheimer's. She's essentially suffering from Alzheimer's, and it seems the determination at the moment is such that she won't be fit to stand trial, although that will be subject to 2 further psychiatric reports by a geriatric psychiatrist from the United Kingdom and a psychiatrist from Singapore. Cases 3 and 4, the last 2 cases, quite complex for me to talk about in a public forum. Nevertheless, if I was to say to you, I have learned to cherish my own legal system and appreciate it in a way that I never did before. Learning things at law school, the theory of law, the independence of judges and prosecutors, it's not something you appreciate until you work in a place where perhaps these things don't exist in the same way. But certainly, I would say to you, in this country, treasure it, because if there's no due process, if there's no due process and that element of fairness, which we all enjoy in the United Kingdom and the US, doesn't exist, where, for example, in my country, the great and small alike can be brought before the criminal justice system, then ultimately you really do despair. Somebody sent me actually a quote by an American author, Liza Wilcox, and it actually says it all. I hope it will mean something to you, because as I say, I can't say too much about these cases, but to sin by silence when we should protest makes cowards out of men. I've now got that on the pinboard in my office.